Well, welcome back to the KURE Lab. I hope you enjoyed part one. Let's get back to Rick Miller and talk more about this study at London South Bank University.
You touched on the Norwegian study, but there is an even more contemporary study from London South Bank University, one of the UK's leading research universities, that shows proof positive that the oxygen inside each and every bottle of KURE does indeed make its way into your system and all the way to your skin. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a bit about that study, but let's talk about performance. Let's talk about sports, because so many fitness enthusiasts out there and sports people are looking to obtain that edge, be it in their recovery, their in-sport play, their day-to-day performance, whatever it might be. Now, as I foreshadowed at the top of the show, we are in possession of that trial now. It makes for some really extraordinary reading, and the results are pretty impressive. The results showed that just one bottle of this stuff before exercise can reduce your lactate buildup by up to 20% and can reduce your blood pressure by up to 5%. Now, I want to get back to the results in just a second, but first of all, you're very familiar with this study. Can you tell us how the study was conducted?
Of course. There is some amazing research, obviously, on top of the London South Bank study, which of course I hope we can get into as well. But basically, the researchers at London South Bank, they took 12 male participants, and they did an interesting thing with this particular setup. They subjected them to a cycling trial, which is very standard in sports science research, and they did it in a way to try and show just how powerful KURE water could be, because of having extra oxygen in there. So what they did is they simulated the cycling trial in either normal oxygen conditions, which is about 20% of the atmosphere, which we talked about before, or hypoxia conditions, about 14% oxygen. So that's basically about like the same of going up about 3,000 meters in altitude. So it'd be like climbing up the Pyrenees, and going skiing or something like that, something like that. That's the same level of oxygen, okay? So the participants didn't know which one the water was, and obviously because they taste identical, because the oxygen has no taste, it's easy to blind people to this. Or KURE immediately before they did the exercise. Now, they drank a good volume of the water. They drank 850 mils. And then what the experimenters measured was a number of different things. As Andrew said, this is a very comprehensive study, and that's why it's so great to talk about it. So they measured things like blood plasma volume. They looked at intra and extracellular volume. They looked at fluid loss. They looked at perception of fatigue. They looked at crucially oxygenation of the muscle tissue, skin, and also they looked at arterial oxygen saturation. They looked at cardiovascular strain. They looked at heart rate, they looked at blood pressure, and they looked at lactate. So they looked at a lot of stuff, okay, with this. And what they did is the exercise trial that they did was called a ramp test to exhaustion. And I do these sometimes with my clients to see basically how fit they are. So it's an incremental test where you make the exercise more difficult, that you don't have to be going very fast, but you're just making it more difficult over time, usually by adding weight to the bike or resistance. And then basically when the person can't do any more, then you stop the test effectively. And the way that they measured the oxygen saturation of the tissues was they used something called near-infrared spectroscopy. Now, again, you might be familiar with this if you've ever been to hospital. I really hope this hasn't happened to you, and you've had like those little things put on your finger, with a little red light. That's a similar type of technology. And the reason that works is because the wavelength of oxygen is about 850 to 760 nanometers. So the infrared is able to basically to capture that wavelength, and the machine can then figure out what percentage saturation of oxygen is in the blood. And because infrared light can penetrate our tissue, we can actually see this. So it's a validated method for looking at oxygen saturation in the tissue. And I think that's the crucial point here, is that they went to a lot of effort to try to get the best results possible, obviously, because as oxygenated water had been under a lot of scrutiny before in the literature. And as I said, a lot of eminent people had come out and said this was just nonsense. And I think the guys at London South Bank had really tried to make sure that they got great data. And as Andrew said, there was some really amazing results that came from the study. So under the normal oxygen conditions, as Andrew said, there was a 5% drop in blood pressure after drinking the KURE water versus the plain water, where the blood pressure actually went up. So in the plain water condition, they actually increased their blood pressure, and there was a drop in blood pressure with the KURE. Now you might think, well, why does that matter? Well, blood pressure is actually really important for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
It's number one. It's the leading. It's hypertension or high blood pressure is one of the leading reasons people have a heart attack across the world, and heart disease is the leading cause of death. So anything to do with the heart and blood pressure is something you want to pay attention to, especially if you're a man, because we're at higher risk of all these things, unfortunately. So if you can reduce your blood pressure just before exercise, which tends to increase blood pressure anyway, then that's typically a good thing, as long as you're not on blood pressure reducing medication. So that was really, really interesting in of itself, just doing that. Then 10 minutes after the exercise, this is where it got really interesting. In the plain water group, or the spring water group, their blood pressure was actually above their baseline. So they measured the blood pressure before they started the exercise, and it was above their baseline measurement. Now, that's what you would expect. You've just finished some exhausting exercise. Your blood pressure is going to be a little bit up. Your heart's been pumping. You would expect it to be a little bit above your baseline, okay? So it's normal. But with KURE, it was actually 3% below their baseline. So not only did it drop before the exercise, it then dropped after the exercise. So that's very significant, because in a clinical setting, a 10% reduction in blood pressure would be a meaningful safety improvement. If we see a 10% drop, in somebody with hypertension, over time, whatever they're doing, a diet change or a lifestyle change, we would see that as, we'd be clapping and saying, oh, that's fantastic, well done. But they got a 5% reduction just from drinking a bottle of water.
One bottle, Rick. One bottle and a 5% reduction. Now, we'd need to obviously repeat this in different populations and see what happens. But I think it's a very, very, very interesting result, and one that that really struck me, obviously, as somebody who works with people with maybe post heart attack or with hypertension. It was actually quite stand out. Okay, let's pause on blood pressure for just a second, and I want to come back to the lactate, the perceived effort, altitude sickness, all of the other extraordinary findings from the study. But let's pause on blood pressure, because first of all, talk to me about the potential sports performance and recovery benefits that can flow from having a reduction in blood pressure, such as the one that we found in the LSBU study.
So, so one of the markers of physical fitness is the ability for you to return to a normal blood pressure after exercise. So a classical sign of physical lack of fitness, let's call it, somebody's unfit, is when they start exercise. First of all, they can't dissipate heat properly, which is why they go red in the face, and they're panting because their body's unable to dissipate heat. But the other thing you see is a massive increase in blood pressure and heart rate, which doesn't go back down for quite a long period of time. So in real terms, if you can get an improvement in blood pressure after physical fitness, you're going to be quicker to recover between bouts of exercise. If you're doing a multi exertion sport, maybe like CrossFit, or you're doing boxing, or you're doing a multi sprint sport like soccer or some tennis, or whatever it is that you're doing, or running, that's really, really impressive. And the other thing as well is that you're just not going to feel as tired, because the ability of your body to slow itself down, it's like a car, decelerating. It requires a lot of energy to do that, to slow the heart rate down, to slow the kind of the flow of blood quickly. And that is a massive reduction in cardiovascular strain, basically, which is what the researchers were trying to ascertain is there an improvement in cardiovascular strain? You, as an athlete, are you going to suddenly, I don't know, beat all your mates at your next five-a-side tournament, or suddenly do a PR? Not sure. Can't make that guarantee to you. But what I will say is that you probably, with that kind of change, if you're one of the people that responds in that sort of way, you will notice the difference.
Yeah.
That's a significant change.
Yeah, and let's zoom out a bit. Let's have a look at what the implications of a reduction in blood pressure are for the general population. Because,
Yes.
we hear, as you kind of mentioned, heart disease is a killer.
Yes.
It's something that is on the rise across the world, especially the Western world at the moment. And I think that understandings, and jump in any time if I've got this wrong, Rick, but understandings of heart disease and cholesterol in particular are starting to evolve a little bit. And
Yes.
really what we start to see is where there is damage in the arterial lining, the body actually tries to help you by sending cholesterol to the site. So the real question seems to be, is cholesterol the arsonist or the firefighter? And so how much of that should we believe? To what extent do you think that cholesterol is responsible for heart disease, or how much is it a symptom? Is it a symptom or a cause? And are there other ways that we can look at heart disease, such as blood flow?
Yeah, I think any decent cardiologist or lipidologist would concur with me when they would say that if you've got any of the kind of the three, what we call the three highs, you've got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and a high waistline, then you're at a major risk of a heart attack. Now, the one that they would want to reduce as quickly as possible is the blood pressure.
Yep.
So the fact that we can show that that's coming down, because it's as you said, you just got to imagine like a nice clean example here. Imagine a hose pipe, and you increase the pressure in a hose pipe. Imagine what it's going to do to the inner lining of that hose pipe just by increasing its pressure by 5%, 10%, and that happening all the time, because your heart doesn't stop pumping, obviously, because if it did, you would die. And thank God your blood pressure doesn't drop. But if that kind of torsion is happening all the time, it's going to eventually have its toll on as you said, the endothelial lining, this kind of lining of the blood vessels in the body. And what's really important about this is that, as we talked about before, this idea of zeta potential, the negative charges are crucial in terms of blood viscosity. So when people have a heart attack, or a stroke, which the only difference is where it occurs, basically. A heart attack happens in the heart and a stroke happens in the brain.
Yeah.
But typically it's a combination of factors, which is that there's an occlusion of a major blood vessel somewhere. And that occlusion is due to clumping of basically substances which are in the blood, of which there are many. There are clotting factors, there are proteins, there are obviously cells like red blood cells, there are immune cells, there could be cholesterol as well, free cholesterol floating around, could be glucose. But the problem is that it's clumping together and it's blocking the pipe, as it were. Now, what you want is it to be free flowing beautifully, and you want all the cells to be spread out. You don't want them to be clumping up together. And this is where I think KURE is very, very interesting. So again, one of the things that they have shown is that when you consume a bottle of KURE water, what you can do, and again, this has been demonstrated under what's called blood live microscopy, so looking at a blood sample basically under the microscope, is that the cells start to spread apart again, as they should do, because when they've got a normal zeta potential, just like that zeta potential I talked about with the nanobubbles in the water, they should spread apart from each other, because like forces repel. Again, remember this from physics class. So, and that's brilliant, because that's exactly what you want in a red blood cell. You see them repel each other, and then they just move along nicely through the blood vessel, and they don't clump together. When they do clump together, it's called the rouleau effect, and basically they look like kind of stacked poker chips all together, and that's really bad, because that's exactly what you don't want. As I said, that's kind of a clumping effect. So when people say to me, I went to my doctor or my cardiologist, and he said, oh, your cholesterol is really high and we need to reduce it. It's kind of it's as you said, it's kind of a monocle like viewpoint on a much wider issue that's going on here. and looking at a more holistic approach of reducing blood pressure, improving viscosity, so basically the thickness of the blood and helping it to flow properly, would have a much greater effect on cardiovascular risk than worrying about cholesterol necessarily. And I'm not saying for a second that anybody who's on their statin or whatever, or cholesterol lowering medication, should suddenly stop it. That's absolutely a conversation you need to have with your doctor or your cardiologist and go from there. I don't know your specific situation. But what I can say is that, as you quite rightly said, cholesterol is quite tightly controlled by the human body, because cholesterol is found in every single cell of the body. It's an essential substance. It's like the bricks of a house, and your body will make more of it in response to inflammation. So as you said, it's a great analogy that you use, the arsonist or the firefighter. You see cholesterol at the scene, but was it the problem, or was it trying to help the situation? And that's exactly what I see as this analogy. If you can heal this process, and this kind of reestablish the zeta potential and the negative charge across the body, you're going to put yourself into a much healthier state, regardless of what your cholesterol is doing. And there is even some suggestion, and again, because we don't, again, like most medications, we don't really know how they all work, to be honest. Statins, we don't even know how they work really, but they do lower cholesterol, but that's not actually the way that they are proposed to actually help prevent cardiovascular disease, which they don't really do very well anyway. Is that they actually just reduce inflammation, and the way that they reduce inflammation is by potentially restoring some of that lining in the endothelial lining, which is something I only learned sometime not too long ago, actually, about statin therapy. But I think most cardiologists wouldn't even know that, which is a real shame, because these are given out like sugar pills to people, and this is never talked to them.
Really is. Let's move to lactate, because I think lactate and the findings from the LSBU study were quite extraordinary, especially because of their implications for professional sport. So tell us about what the lactate findings were, how it was measured, and what the implications are for having a lower lactate buildup in a professional or competitive athlete.
Okay, so let's talk about what lactate is basically. So lactate is effectively it's a fuel source. It's an intermediary in the process of something called glycolysis. So glycolysis is basically a process where your body takes carbohydrate in the form of glucose, and under certain conditions, it can either create something called pyruvate when there's plenty of oxygen, and then that goes into the mitochondria and we make the energy that we talked about at the start, ATP. Or if there's not enough oxygen, it's anaerobic respiration that's going on, you make something called lactate, and lactate can also be used to create ATP as well. It's just not as clean, basically. It's like burning like a low quality gasoline basically in your car. And so when that happens, the problem is that lactate is an acidic substance. Whenever you see 8 anywhere in chemistry, you always think acid. So lactate accumulates in the cell, and that lowers the pH, so the acid-base balance, and that's what causes the burn. When you're doing exercise, at a very high intensity, and you can't do anymore because it's just, that burn is just killing me, my calves or whatever it is, and you can't do any more exercise. And that's partly why we stop exercising. It's called the peripheral fatigue, hypothesis. Now, why is this important in the context of performance? Well, lactate measurement, because it's accumulating in the blood, we can actually look at it in clinical and exercise performance settings to see when you are accumulating lactate in the blood, and also when it reaches a steady state. Because what you want to do as a performance athlete is you want to be able to have the ability to kind of push the button, to step on the gasoline, and maybe go anaerobic for a moment or two, to get past your opponent and get to the finish line. You don't want to always have to be aerobic. You want to be able to push the button, but you want to be able to do it with the ability of your muscle to actually manage the amount of lactate that's accumulating and the amount that it's shipping out to get, to clear out the bloodstream. And those two time points, the the accumulation of lactate in the blood and then your ability to reach a steady state is called the lactate turn point, and then the maximal lactate steady state. These are two specific markers that we look for in exercise physiology. Now, when somebody's incredibly fit, we look at like our top athletes. I think of like someone who had a famously very, very high lactate threshold, Lance Armstrong. Like him or hate him, he was a fantastic athlete, and he had a very, very high lactate threshold. That basically meant that he could exercise anaerobically for a very long period of time, and it didn't really affect his power output, because as the lactate builds up in the body or in the muscle tissue, it starts to affect the proteins of muscle contraction, and this is partially why you kind of like can't seem to move your legs properly, and you can't do the work properly because it's painful, and it's affecting the performance. So lactate's really important to measure as if you're interested in performance, because if you can affect it in any way, think about it, you can go for longer and you can push harder, so people are trying to do it. But the traditional way that most athletes will attempt to reduce lactate are by two methods, and they're both supplements. Well, no, I'll say three. They train it, obviously, by getting fitter, and by doing your sport more, you are able to clear lactate faster. That's part of the process of becoming fitter. That's obviously the most important way. But then obviously people do turn to supplements, and there are two major ones that people use. One is sodium bicarbonate, basically baking soda, stuff that you'd use in cooking, and people literally ingest this stuff, and it's been done for decades. Again, it's one of the first sports supplements people were using. And it does work. It buffers lactate, but it causes major side effects. You can imagine putting, baking soda into your gut. You're going to rush to the toilet, pretty quickly. And so it would cause the runs very, very fast. So it's not a good supplement at all. And again, horrible stuff. You don't want to be doing that. The second one, which is a bit more, it came on the scene actually after I qualified as a dietitian, is beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is basically a derivative of the amino acid carnosine, and it works in a similar fashion to bicarbonate, and that it helps to buffer lactate accumulation so you can work harder for longer. The problem is that, again, it comes with a whole host of side effects. The most common one is called paresthesia, which is basically you get this horrible tingling, like sort of flesh-crawling sensation in your skin. And if anybody's got skin-related problems like eczema, psoriasis, or even just sensitive skin, it's just a horrible thing to have to cope with. And it doesn't even work that well, to be honest. But weirdly enough, both of these supplements are recommended by the International Olympic Committee as safe and effective, which just shows you something about the safety profile of the Olympic Committee, and what they're willing to accept. So I think that's quite amazing, to be honest.
It really is.
So that was a big explanation, all to say that in this trial, what they did under the normal oxygen conditions, what they saw with the participants when they drank the KURE water, they had a 4% lower lactate accumulation at all the time points where they measured lactate during the trial, compared to the normal water conditions, or the spring water conditions. Now, what does that mean? These individuals didn't do a complete exercise to failure, and they weren't doing a timed trial. So this was not meant to be reflective of a real cycling event. But the proposal by the researchers was that if they had continued to exercise, that they would have done so with less effort, less pain, less discomfort, and they probably would have improved their performance by the end. And I think that's a fair thing to have seen. And that's also been reflected in some previous research that's also been done as well. Some case studies as well with runners.
I'd like to get to those in just a second. But just to sum up on the LSBU study, taken together, what are the implications for professional sport in being able to reduce lactate buildup by up to 20% and being able to reduce blood pressure post-exertion by 5%? And what does it mean for a product like KURE to be able to actually deliver those benefits to professional and competitive athletes?
I think the big implication is that when oxygen availability in your sport is tight, either you're working at the absolute top end of your particular event or your training session or your game or whatever it is, whenever you've got to perform and oxygen's going to be a problem because you're pushing so hard, that's where KURE's really going to shine. You're going to see big improvements. You're also going to recover faster, potentially, between the sessions, so you can go again sooner, or at least you'll be ready for your game in better conditions than you were before. You'll be better recovered. So the implications are there that your performance will be better in the long run if you continue to take this product, and it's safe.
Yeah, so you can recover faster, means you can train harder, means you can ultimately perform better on the field.
Yeah.
What's not to love? Now, as we kind of discussed, that is from drinking just one bottle of this stuff.
Yeah.
If you were to look at the potential benefits from drinking more of this, I mean, it pretty much stands to reason, doesn't it, that some of these benefits would be turbocharged, especially if you drink it over a longer period of time. And as you know, there is now a new study about to start, which is with the University of Roehampton, another leading UK research university, which is going to tease some of these things out in a bit more detail, interrogate the benefits of drinking more KURE over an extended period of time. What do you expect to find from that? I'm not asking you to kind of, to presuppose the results of the trial, but what do you expect to find? And when you answer, and you touched on this a second ago, there are a number of case studies and observational studies from around the world that have been compiled over a period of time that do look at the benefits of drinking more KURE over a longer period of time.
The question that's always sat in my mind is that if, again, a bit like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, if you can give more oxygen for a longer period of time and you can kind of saturate the body with more oxygen for 24 hours prior to exercise, which is typically the sort of period of time that most people would be looking to do an intervention. If you think about carb loading and this sort of thing, most athletes are doing stuff, in the short period of time just before exercise. Ultimately, we'd love people to be drinking KURE all the time. But, if they can only do it for, say, a few days before their event, one day of drinking pure KURE and then a little bit before their event would probably make the difference. And that's what we want to look at with the Roehampton study. We want to see what happens in that kind of time period with a bigger dosing, and then with this much better design protocol to see if we can get better results from that particular study.
Yeah. And look, I don't want to gild the lily here. The London South Bank University study was, of course, in really strict clinical conditions. We did touch on these observational studies from around the world, and what I mean is I don't want to indicate that they were conducted in the same clinical conditions, but I think that the findings of these observational studies are nevertheless quite remarkable. And if you go through some of them, I know you're familiar with these studies, if you go through some of these results, they indicate a 36% reduction in lactate buildup as a result of drinking KURE. It indicates a 7 to 8% increase in blood oxygen concentration as a result of drinking KURE. These studies show a 4.5% reduction in heart rate when running to failure as a result of drinking KURE. These are quite extraordinary metrics, aren't they? Especially in a world where athletes will bust a gut for even a 0.5% improvement across some of these areas.
Yeah, and take dangerous drugs and take, unregulated supplements and, all sorts of stuff to get, a 1% improvement, because at the end of the day, you don't remember the guy who got the silver medal, right? You only remember the guy who got the gold medal. And that's the problem, is that, people are willing, even in amateur sport, they're willing to go to serious lengths to improve, and I work with guys, again, many of them are just amateur athletes, they just want to be good at what they do. They're really willing to spend some serious money and put some serious, things on the line to get, their time improved. So if you can do this in a safe way, that doesn't have any side effects, that is easily available, that your kids can drink and you can drink, that for me is really, really important, because the thing with my men that I see in clinic is that I want them to leave obviously healthier than when they first came to me. I wouldn't want ever to implement something and this is why I'm sometimes termed a low supplement guy in my field, with nutrition and dietetics. Quite often when people go to see a nutritionist, they expect to leave with like a bag of supplements and various things. I don't really do that. I tend to take things away from people because they're often taking too much anyway. But the reason for that is because of safety.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that, again, thinking from an ancestral perspective, that human beings are meant to take a lot of stuff for a long period of time. It's not the way that we've evolved, and I don't think it's healthy for people. But I think something like KURE, which is just water, with additional oxygen, which we know is very beneficial for the body, is a great thing.
Yeah, totally. Rick, one of the biggest thrills of my professional career to date was last August when KURE was announced as the official oxygen water partner of Crystal Palace Football Club. It was an enormous thrill to be a part of that announcement, working with such a fantastic club and such a terrific group of people. But what a lot of people don't know, Rick, is that KURE's journey with Crystal Palace actually began towards the back end of last season, a period that coincided with that club's extraordinary run home to finish the season. Their close to the season really was the talk of the football world. They beat Liverpool, they beat Manchester United 4-0, they beat Aston Villa 5-0. Now, I want to be really clear, we're not taking credit for that remarkable run of success, much though I'd love to. But of course, in a world where high performance managers really are looking for every single possible legal thing that they can do to gain that edge. I mean, is it any wonder, on the basis of what you've seen, that clubs would be looking to things like KURE, and to KURE specifically, for a potential boost to their on-field performance?
Absolutely. I mean, again, as I said, I've worked for nearly 2 decades, in nutrition at all sorts of levels, everything from the amateur up to Olympic level. And one thing that I'll often see with particularly young athletes is that they are very, very eager to improve, because they want to be the next, Cristiano Ronaldo, on the pitch. But again, they're given a very long, discussion at the start of the season, at the start of their training camp, to avoid taking supplements because of the risks around doping from the World Anti-Doping Association. And something like KURE, which is Informed Sport Certified, which is the highest accolade you can get in sports supplementation certification. It's a world recognized standard of quality. That's something to be really to hang their hat on and think, okay, there's something safe that we can give to our under 21s or under 18s and not worry about, for a second. And of course, you can give them all sorts of other stuff as well, which also might be informed sport regulated. But you can't say for a second that won't have lasting side effects on the person, because just because it's free of banned substances doesn't mean it's not going to cause damage to them.
Sure. And you are right. KURE does have full sign-off from Informed Sports, which is the Bible for the World Anti-Doping Authority. So so that's very much the case. It's interesting because watching the Sky Sports coverage just a few weeks ago, in fact, I think it was towards the end of last year, the commentators were doing a segment between matches and were absolutely salivating over some of the performances that Crystal Palace was putting in. They'd just beaten Spurs, ably managed by an Australian, I'll have you know. Big shout out to my man Ange Postecoglou. But they absolutely ran Spurs off the park, and no one runs Spurs off the park, right? They run more than any other field. They run more than any other team in the league. And the presenter on Sky had the big screen graphic with all of these performance metrics: distance run, distance at high intensity, distance sprinting, number of sprints. And the presenter was literally at a loss for words. What is going on at Crystal Palace? He was saying. They're breaking every records. These records go back to 2019. They're ranked first in the league. It was this incredible kind of, moment where, some of the incredible things that we'd seen at an individual level in some of our clinical settings appeared to be translating really, really well to a team sport and a team environment.
talking about them smashing records when they played against Spurs last week, and here is the evidence. Distance at high intensity, their best ever. So these records go back to 2019. Palace smashed it last week against Spurs. Distance running at high speed, the distance sprinting, the number of sprints. It makes you exhausted, Clinton, just looking at this.
Yeah, because I never sprinted like that. I knew what you were getting at there. You were right. When they were sprinting, that's the performance you want to see from Crystal Palace.
Is that the level now?
That is the level.
Yeah, it is astounding when you see those kind of highlights from the commentators, and the data doesn't lie. You know, you're looking at match analysis, and there's so many metrics you can look at now. And if they're running faster, they're running faster. If they're making more shots on target, they're making more shots on target. There's no argument there at all. It's you can call out placebo effect all day long, but it's I don't think the data lies in that circumstance.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, let's take this back into the real world. From the lab into the real world. Rick, I want to tell you and our viewers about a little story about a very special kid. His name is Stanley. Now, Stanley, at about 18 months old, developed shocking eczema. And it was really, really sad. He was really, really struggling, the poor young fella. He was in and out of hospital every couple of weeks. Every night at bedtime, they had to lather him up in this special gel. They'd wrap him up in bandages. They'd put him in a special kind of sleep suit. And every morning, without fail, the poor little guy would wake up absolutely soaked in blood. And it was a really, really sad thing. And his wonderful mother was at her wit's end, totally at her wit's end. She had tried everything. And she eventually tried KURE. And Rick, I mean, it almost sounds too good to be true, but baby Stanley, within 3 to 4 weeks, saw his eczema beginning to clear up. Yeah. And within, a short period of time, he was a really happy, healthy, normal kid. And I've, had the pleasure of seeing him talk about, the difference that KURE Oxygen Water has made in his life. The oxygen supplement that KURE is, it's given him his life back. And it actually brought his mum to tears. The fact that this boy, who was so poorly and was so ill for such a long period of time, is now out playing with his friends, living the life that he always dreamed of. And to see the smile on his face, Rick, it was absolutely extraordinary. Now, there is a really kind of good faith scientific basis about why a product like KURE could have such benefits for a kid like Stanley, isn't there? Mm-hmm. And I'd also kind of reference that if you look at our Trustpilot page, there are some 200 totally unsolicited reviews of our product. 5-star reviews. I think there's 1 4-star review there. But on the whole, they're all 5-star reviews talking about how this product has helped people deal with a range of inflammatory diseases, such as eczema, such as psoriasis. The list goes on and on and on. Can you talk to us a little bit about why it is that that Stanley and people like him might be benefiting so profoundly from drinking KURE? And I think you're going to talk about a thing called deuterium.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely, deuterium is part of it. I think the first thing to go back to again is the kind of the 5 key areas that I said about the beginning about the importance of oxygen. So oxygen is very important in cellular respiration, and what we do know with any inflammatory related condition, be it eczema, be it psoriasis, but you pick any of them, any of these chronic inflammatory conditions, which are arising across the world, I should say as well. They're becoming more common, not less common. Is that typically there's some sort of breakdown in what we call the mitochondrial system when it comes to management of inflammation, and this is why you get these kind of awful breakouts, flare-ups, and seemingly uncontrollable inflammation across whatever tissue it is. And depending on the person, it's either the joints, or it's, in poor little Stanley's case, it was his skin. There obviously is a role there in terms of the bacteria, which we've talked about before, in terms of the gut microbiome. Again, that also plays a role in eczema, but it's also rooted in inflammation, which is governed by the mitochondria. Now, we need to talk about, as you said, deuterium. So the mitochondria are the site of this cellular respiration where the oxygen gets to when we make this amazing substance ATP. And when we have enough ATP, we have enough energy, and so the cells are happy. And if you think about happiness for a cell being a low inflammation state, that's kind of what we're aiming for with the mitochondria. And this is the case for pretty much every disease across the planet. You can name everything from cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, eczema, whatever it is. There is some sort of trace back to the mitochondria. So you need to protect the mitochondria. And the problem is that if there is a deficit of or some damage to the mitochondria, then this process of using oxygen to generate energy just doesn't work properly. And one of the ways that can happen is by the accumulation of a compound called deuterium. Now, again, most people, are probably lost at this point. Again, what the hell is deuterium and where do I pick it up from? So I had the pleasure of talking to probably one of the most eminent researchers in deuterium on the planet on my own podcast some time ago, which is Dr. Laszlo Boros, who's actually a pediatrician of all people. He used to work in the US as a pediatrician, and he's actually, though, a foremost researcher in deuterium, or deuteromics as it's known, and he's based at a university in Hungary from his own country. And what deuterium is it's a naturally occurring isotope of the element hydrogen. Now, why is that important? Well, first of all, we have to explain what an isotope is. So again, you might remember from chemistry, isotopes are basically almost like chemical cousins of the same element on the periodic table. So deuterium is a variation or a cousin of hydrogen. It looks like hydrogen from a chemical perspective, but it has a slight difference to its atomic structure. So the differences with deuterium is that it has an additional neutron in its nucleus, and what that does is it makes it really fat and really big. But it's still a hydrogen, so it's still a cousin of the little hydrogen molecule that we all know. Now, what does that mean? Well, deuterium is found in the air because it's part of hydrogen is part of the gases that make up the air around us. It's obviously found in water because, again, hydrogen is also found in water, as we talked about, H2O, and it's also found because water is also found in food that we eat, like plants, etc., animals. We accumulate it in our tissues. It's also found in the food that we eat as well. So we can't get away from accumulating deuterium. And our bodies are very well equipped to try and remove too much deuterium from the body. Now, why do we need to remove it? Well, because what happens is in the last stage of generating energy in the mitochondria, and the way that the mitochondria actually generate energy, other than just using this oxygen and magically creating ATP, is that they actually break down the food that we eat in these different metabolic pathways, which we don't have to go into a lot of detail now, but they're something that you might remember from your chemistry class, biology class, I should say. And what you're doing is you're feeding, in the end, ultimately, more electrons into this transport chain, which is in the mitochondria, which is why when you look at mitochondria under an electron microscope, they actually kind of almost fizz with an electrical charge, because there is literally a circuit running around them. So We're kind of almost like we're electric beings in some way.
Extraordinary.
And we do have a charge on us.
Yeah.
And when these electrons get to the end of this electron transport chain, at the end of that chain is an enzyme called an ATPase. So again, if you see the word ase at the end, it basically means an enzyme, like lactase, for instance. And the role of the ATPase is to allow the movement of oxygen through the ATPase, which is why we need oxygen, which then spins and creates ATP. The problem is that also at the same time, hydrogen goes through that particular enzyme at the same time. So there's kind of almost it's kind of like two-way movement of different molecules, oxygen in one direction and hydrogen in the other direction. And deuterium tries to go the same way, because it looks like a hydrogen and it feels like a hydrogen, but it's not a hydrogen.
Yeah.
And it's too big and it's too fat, and it breaks the ATPase. So you can see where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Too much deuterium in your body, broken mitochondria, and then you get more inflammation, more problems, because you've not got enough energy being created by your body. Now, obviously, you make more mitochondria, just like every other cell in the body, But that tends to decline as we age. And we undergo something called a heteroplasmy, which is basically where the mitochondria become a little bit old and they become a bit misshapen and they mutate. And so this is why, as we age, we tend to accumulate more diseases. This is why things tend to occur more often. We tend to see more cardiovascular disease, more diabetes, more cancer as we get older, because we're unable to mitigate the inflammation as we would be in youth. Now, the reason that something like KURE could be so helpful is that obviously in that sort of condition is that, as I said, you're providing more oxygen to the body, which we know from KURE's research and other research that the oxygen does reach the peripheral tissues. So again, the cells of the upper epithelial linings of the skin have a lot of mitochondria in them, a huge amount of mitochondria. So in Stanley's case, it could be, and again, I'm just postulating here, that more oxygen into that tissue, better mitochondria working properly, you can then heal the skin layers properly, stop bacteria getting in when they shouldn't, seal up those leaky barriers between the skin cells, and then reduce the inflammation because there's plenty of oxygen coming into the tissue. And because he's a young lad, his skin is turning over very quickly. You tend to see rapid changes in children with any kind of intervention, whether medical or nutritional. This is why children are sometimes used as a marker of, sadly, the health of a country, because you can see the changes in them quite very quickly. So it makes sense that something like KURE, when provided to him, through the mechanisms that we've talked about, could have such a profound effect on his particular eczema. Now, would it happen for every single child that we see? My own daughter had eczema, so I am intimately, I am aware of how awful it can be for children. Not as bad as it sounds like for Stanley, but still pretty awful for the little darling. Yeah. I'm not sure, is the answer to that. But at the end of the day, if you're a parent and you are desperately trying to help your child, and all you've been given by your dermatologist is, a bucket of, emollient cream, which is what probably he was given, and some strong anti-inflammatories and, some corticosteroids to try and reduce the inflammation, and told, go away and deal with it. Well, you're probably going to be a bit fed up and at your wit's end, like Stanley's mum was, and you're going to be thinking, well, what else is out there that could help me? And if you know that it's safe and that it's not going to cause side effects, unlike, many of these drugs, unfortunately they have major side effects, which is why, as a clinician, I chose, and no judgment to any parent who chooses to use, corticosteroids. I chose not to provide those to my daughter because I just didn't feel that the benefits outweighed the costs. And, of course, you're going to look at other options. So I think it's amazing, his story, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why he could get better, just by using KURE to do that, and by clearing the deuterium out. Maybe that's the way that it's helped him.
Yeah, and look, it's really amazing, Rick, to look at his discharge papers from the hospital, where the consultant pediatric dermatologist made some recommendations about what Stanley should do, and one of the things that was recommended was keep drinking KURE water. So it was amazing to see that this was actually really kind of recognised and corroborated by a medical professional, that this product was having such a profound effect. Now, I'm really pleased to be able to tell you that Stanley is happy as Larry now. He doesn't really drink KURE anymore because his eczema hasn't just been treated, it appears to have gone altogether. Now, I'll caveat that by saying that there are times where they might go away and they might swim in a chlorine pool for a while, and he'll start to get a bit of aggravation. But what happens then is he just drinks some more KURE water, and the eczema seems to disappear again.
There you go. Exactly. So, and this is what's so remarkable about the product, is that it's it's that kind of acute intervention that you can use. It is almost, in some ways, almost medicinal, but it can be used in both ways. Either by drip feeding, a bit like with the the personal hyperbaric chamber, or you can use it in an acute fashion, to treat it as a particular issue that you've got. I think though for those people who are kind of listening to this and thinking, you know, what a lot of hodgepodge, you know, how could that possibly work and things like that. I think you, I think if you're at your wit's end, you know, and you happen to have come across this conversation and you've got a particular condition that, you know, you tried everything for, what have you got to lose? You know, what have you got to lose? You know, giving it a shot.
Look, I think you're right. So I just want to kind of wrap up. You've touched on mitochondria, but I think it is such an incredible area of science and field of study that more and more attention and effort is going into, and understandings of are becoming greater and greater. I mentioned Gary Brecker just earlier. I saw a piece of content that he did quite recently where he spoke about Alzheimer's more as a type 3 diabetes, which I thought was a really, really extraordinary way to put it. And he spoke about the importance of getting oxygen into the mitochondria. And he spoke about there being a 16 times or a 16x differential in the potential performance of your mitochondria. So what that kind of really said to me is there a way that we can get our mitochondria to perform better? And if so, how profound and how widespread will those benefits be to our entire physiology?
Yeah, I mean, I've done absolutely no justice to the incredible topic that, as you say, is the mitochondria. I mean, I've kind of brushed over the surface, but it really is, as you said, we could have talked for the last 2 hours just about the mitochondria.
Sure.
It's probably, if anybody's going to become a nerd about anything, first of all, oxygen is very important, and obviously KURE Water being definitely at the top of your list. But the second thing you want to become a nerd in is the mitochondria, because the story of even how mitochondria got into our body and became this kind of synergistic, symbiotic, effectively creature living in us that's giving us energy is just amazing, and the way that they have their own genetic code for a start, which is in itself insane. We think that it's all in the nucleus, and it's not. It has its own genetic information. The mitochondria are able to effectively sense the environment, so they can detect magnetic fields, just like we can detect fields of coherence around individuals. We can feel heartbeats of other people around us. This is also postulated to be the reason why people sort of know when they're around somebody who's a bit, there's something off with them. People will say, something not quite right.
Intuitively.
About it's kind of intuitively, it's like this coherence kind of level that they feel with them. And the mitochondria are also at the site of many different hormones as well that we make, like pregnenolone, melatonin. They also affect, as I said, this kind of electrical discharge that goes through the body, which gives us literally a physical charge on our body. And we talked about the zeta potential and the importance of that. That is again a huge topic of electric charge that has been demonstrated throughout the last, I would say, 100 years by various different researchers across different continents, of how important electrical flow is in our body and how the mitochondria are a part of that process. And the last thing, again, if you want even some even more amazing information, is they also produce something called biophotons. They actually emit light from the body. So not only are we absorbing light as a species with photosensitive skin, and obviously we have photosensitive eyes, that's why we can see anything, but also we are emitting light, literally from our body, and it's been detected many times since the 1970s. Anybody who's thinking, again, that's okay, we're going into the outer limits here of weirdness, I would encourage them to read a book by Professor Roland van Wyk, who's a Dutch researcher, and has published a fantastic book all about biophotons and the history of biophotons, and it's all centered around the mitochondria. So I find educating my own men around preserving mitochondrial health to be probably one of the most beneficial and rewarding areas of my own practice. And I think KURE Water and oxygen is a major component of that, because if you think about all the fanfare there is, on many of these big podcasts around breathing and oxygen and meditation and slowing down and getting out into nature, and what are you doing is you're getting more of this vital substance into your body,
Yes.
literally. So why would you not take another pathway that is freely available to you and has been clinically proven to increase oxygen levels in a substantial and robust way?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's extremely well said, Rick. From KURE's standpoint, we really believe deeply in this product. I mean, there is a reason that we are devoting our lives to working on this product. We think that we are a mission-led organisation. We're a vision-led business that has a dream to take this incredible product to the world, to really beneficially impact the lives of people that we've never met before, people all around the world who might benefit from some of the profound benefits of having more oxygen in their system and the unique approach to oxygen delivery that KURE actually represents. We're extremely passionate about this. I can speak personally to say that I notice a massive difference when I drink KURE, and there is a huge number of people who are experiencing the same benefits. And there's a reason that we're embracing science the way that we are. We're, of course, moving on to our Roehampton study now. We think there is such a huge opportunity for this product to really make a difference. And that is what gets us out of bed every morning. I really can't recommend this product highly enough to people who might be looking for an edge in performance or recovery, or who might have some sort of inflammatory condition that they're looking to treat. And look, the truth of the matter is that, eventually I think we get to a point where if you're in the supermarket and you're walking down the aisle and you see a range of products all around about the same price, at a similar price point, but one of these products has all of these incredible functional benefits, why would you walk past it? Why would you choose another water that doesn't have those benefits if you can pick up a product like KURE at around about a similar price point that will deliver such profound effects to your body?
Exactly. It's a no-brainer, as they say.
Yeah, very good. Well, look, Rick Miller, thank you so much for your time today, for being so generous with your insights and your expertise. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the first ever KURE Lab podcast. We look forward to speaking again very, very soon. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for having me. It's been a pleasure on my side too.